If you'd like to follow along, be turning to Romans chapter 16. Romans 16. And then while you're doing that, allow me just to kind of introduce what you've already seen on your lesson sheet. Without looking at the lesson sheet, if I were to ask you, what do you know about Phoebe? I think that's the way to pronounce it. It's the way I'm going to do it anyway. Phoebe, Phoebe. Deaconess, referred to as such, sure is. So, well, we can plunge into this topic of study tonight really quick by going there. And of course, we also know diakonos, the word for deacon, is meaning servant, and thus very appropriately so, she was a servant. And what else do we know about her? Anything that you can think of? What? Where she's from. Crincia, or Cincia. Cincrea, I believe it is. And Cincrea. And that tells us a little bit more, because what we do know about Crincia is not very good. It was very likely, almost certainly, a place that it would be extremely hard to be a Christian, to live a Christian life, to serve God and Christ. And yet she did. The reason I'm kind of posing the questions is for obvious reasons. We know very little about her. Here in Romans 16 is the only time her name, to my knowledge anyway, is even mentioned. And yet, as you notice on the lesson sheet, Paul mentioned over 24 people here in the closing comments and kind of not salutations, but closing thoughts to the church at Rome, the Christians at Rome. Over 24 people he mentioned. But look who's at the top of the list first. Phoebe. And then what Paul says about this dear sister is major. He said, I'm writing to you at Rome Christians, that's in the first chapter. But here in 16th, the last chapter of this epistle, he says, I commend unto you, Phoebe. I've got it spelled wrong from the way my King James that I have in front of me right now, but I know at other places and other versions it's Phoe, doesn't really matter, but I commend her to you. Verse 2, that ye receive her in the Lord. What do you understand from that? Do what? All right. She was righteous. Newell? Well, it's Lord. She's a Christian. She's a baptized believer. Yes, absolutely was. And immediately, I'd like to bring before our mind's eye, though it's a little bit later on in our lesson sheet, stop and consider what it is to be commended by Paul. The great servant, soldier, warrior, defender, faithful Paul. And he's telling them at Rome, by the way, I did not know until I got to digging today, from all the information that we have, Paul had not been in Rome yet. So he was writing to a church commending someone to Christians that he didn't even know. I commend her unto you, that you receive her in the Lord as becometh saints, as a dear sister, as a faithful saint in God. And that not just receive her, not just welcome her, but that you assist her in whatever business she hath need of you. What a blank check. What a blanket statement. To those Christians at Rome, he was saying, here is someone I commend, I respect, worthy of commendation. Not only do you welcome her, you assist her in whatever she does. For the reason, for she hath been a succorer, a benefactor, a helper of many, and of myself also. I read from that he knew her quite well, and without hesitation was saying to this group of Christians, you welcome her, you help her.
That says something about the idea of the law of sowing and reaping also.
Yes, sirree. The idea of sowing and reaping, what she had done, now reaping this from Paul and of the brethren there, and what she had done up in that moment in time. Gavin?
At the end of this chapter in my Bible, it's got this statement. I don't know how to come back. Written to the Romans, the car is, and sent by Phoebe, servant of the church of Cedar.
Right. So in other words, she delivered it. I don't know, other than the word that I just read a moment ago, in whatever business that she is involved in. Most of the ones of whom I consulted, whom I respect as scholars and able maybe to read from the original language and related historical information, most of them consider her as a very wealthy business person, successful. I immediately thought of Lydia, as we've already studied. And maybe she went to Rome on a regular basis to conduct business. Lydia, a seller of purple, dye, things of that nature, had to go other places to get that. Maybe Phoebe also was a traveler there often. And Paul is openly, without reservation, consider how much of a blank check he has written in recommendation. In whatever business she is in. That's our introduction. Pat Holland, if you will lead us in our opening prayer, please. Amen. It's been interesting to me for a long time how some people of the Bible refer to Bible characters as we refer to them, and how much information is given. But it's also rather interesting, revealing, when very little is said. And in this case, such a commendation and statements and references to her being, as it were, a servant or the one that has been a helper of many. And then Paul said, and me also. So in such few words, we can hear a lot about a person. And then Randy's introducing the idea of sowing and reaping, and how that indeed what we sow, we shall reap. The benefits of that are seen in so many different ways. I want to focus on number 3 on the front page of your lesson. Details are not given as to her being a helper of many, but what can you, I'm going to use the word guesstimate, approximate, just theorize. What could she have done to be called a helper of many?
Take food to those who were unable
Right.
to cook or provide for themselves, help with children. Great influence in a community is a outgoing female who loves children and showers them with blessings. Makes the Christian life very attractive.
And immediately I want us to apply that type of definition and discussion to us. One that was well known in her community and her city in Cenchrea, looked up to, respected so highly. What about us? Randy mentioned taking food. I've kind of got this mental image of a casserole. How many casseroles have you delivered and have we delivered? And it served as uplifting food to those that maybe just gotten home from hospital. Maybe it's really been sick with a bug or flu or whatever it was, as we call it, or as they called it back then. But it's not just the food, it's more the gesture of love. They knew Phoebe by her works. And thus again, we come back to that word application to our lives. And whether or not we are doing a good job at being like Phoebe. In James chapter 1, verse 27, we read the words pure religion and undefiled before God, and to visit the widows and the orphans in their affliction, taking care of them, the needs that they have. We have no idea how many widows live close to Phoebe. We don't know if any of them did. We don't know if she helped a widow. But do we not get that description and idea of whoever was close by and whatever needs she had, and back it all the way up to Paul himself when he said, of me also. Phoebe had been that worker and servant and sacrificial one to give. She was at a special place at a special time. The church had not been in existence but a relatively short time. Some of these epistles, 5 or 10 years, some of them 20 or 30 years. But here were different servants who took that ball, a new idea, revolutionary, turned the world upside down. But they were so convinced of the evidence that they had seen that they were willing to give their all, sacrifice everything to be a Phoebe. Newell and then Gavin. Totally. Great illustration and comparison, Newell. The Macedonians referred to in 2 Corinthians 8. And what a marvelous, awesome statement. They were not only working for the kingdom, they were not only giving of themselves and of what they had, but to make a statement of they first gave themselves. When we give our heart, Bible heart's a mind, When we give our all, everything else will fall in place, take place. Gavin, please.
I was just thinking that close proximity of the town she was, her hometown, we'll say here, and it was hands. You wonder if she might have been there in Blble. So if she was traveling from where her hometown was from Rome, traveling to Athens, just a day trip.
Nothing is said, so we can't answer it, but it's a possibility for sure. In the lesson sheet, you found that I even said 2 or 3 times, likely. It's thought to be that way. But some things we just do not know for sure. But very possibly the relationship of Cenchrea, even to Jerusalem, to Rome, wherever it was that she might have traveled for business purposes. What an influence, not only at home, but everywhere else as well. Melissa?
Obviously had financial needs and could have helped financially. Phoebe may have had, evidently.
Absolutely.
She had the means to travel.
Yeah.
Which would not have been everyone. I don't want to limit her.
I don't either, and that's a good point. And most of the ones of which I consulted, I think there were 9 this time, and literally I went into it on the basis of, okay, we don't know a lot about her, and maybe I can pull from background information or historical information. That's why I chose so many. But most every one of them referred to her as a wealthy person. And traveling was one of the indicators. And thus the idea, look at the influence she wielded wherever she went. Got the hiccups. Debbie, please. Yeah. I didn't hear everything that you said, but what I did and agree. I mean, again, I keep coming back to what Paul said, how openly and just major commendation. He wouldn't have done that had she not done what all of you have indicated, and that maybe each of us additionally are thinking. The magnificent woman that she was. Now, back home. But we've got some magnificent people here right tonight that are willing to respond, willing to help, not just for food. Take others that may not have transportation to a doctor or hospital visit, whatever it may be. How marvelous it is to be a part of a family that has members like Phoebe, and of which we can speak commendations of them as well. I don't know how many times in the last 8 years that I've talked about you behind your back. Well, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? But it was a good thing. How many ways in sermons elsewhere that I've spoke about the love of this family, the togetherness of this family, the helping one another of this family, the sacrificing of this family, the serving God faithfully. I mean, in every way, faithfully. And I'm not in any way about to even think about comparing myself to Paul's commendation of Phoebe, but that's what we can do for each other. We do that because we love and because we know the facts. But number 4, the Roman Christians were to receive her openly, willingly, helpfully, give assistance, partner with her. You know what I thought of when I was typing that? You remember when Saul of Tarsus obeyed the gospel, became soon thereafter Paul, and he wanted to join himself with Christians? What did the Christians say? Didn't want to have association, did they? They knew his reputation. We've heard about this man, and he's even here in our area to capture Christians. Oh, they were assured, Barnabas, he's one of us. It's okay. But don't you know that there were many in the first century, as exists today as well, that are not to be trusted, should not be helped in business matters? But Paul is just saying, here's what you Christians need to do to help. Look at the backside. Why would Phoebe do all the gracious deeds in the service of God? How would you answer that question?
She was with,
She appreciated what God had done for her,
She did.
and therefore she wanted to follow the example of Christ because he came as a
His sacrifice as well. Absolutely. Following Christ's example. Gavin?
I was gonna say she had the means and she had the faith, so.
The two ingredients.
She put them to use. She
Right.
Find them and work them out.
Brother Paul, well, I may be off on this, you help me out, and I'm looking at Philemon and Onesimus, the similarity here. Verse, how about receiving her? Verse 11. Let's use verse 12. This is Paul talking to Philemon about Onesimus. He says, they might sin again, thou therefore receive him. That is mine own Bible.
Right.
It gets my attention, mine own Bible.
Right.
Is he not saying if you receive him, you're receiving
Me.
me also, right?
That's right.
And that's kind of like they're to receive her, if they're receiving Christ, also they receive her. I guess Paul, civil fashion.
Brother Paul,
Yes.
I think God touched her in the heart to be an example of other women through all generations.
Absolutely. As a man thinketh in his heart, Proverbs 23, so is he. When we've given our heart, we obviously are going to follow in, if we have funds that's available, if we have time and talents available, whatever it is, we're going to do the best that we can in following through in that way. Gavin?
Can you imagine if it was you or any of us given the honor of delivering that letter to the Romans?
Yeah.
Personally, you personally to deliver that letter? I mean, I don't know what else you can say.
The thought literally went through my mind, did she even know what she was delivering? She may have. And Paul may have even told her.
Well, if Paul noticed you did for something valuable,
Right.
I mean, you know, that's upfront knowledge. I mean, if he said, I want you to take this to the church at Romans, and know that when you go, what a great honor that was. He could have found someone else to take it.
Easily.
I would think.
Yeah, I would think so too. But what an honor, and
Trust he had it.
and then for it to be a commendation equally so. Yes, other thoughts?
Is it fair, as a question, Brother Paul, it's possible that she may have been a single lady because of the freedom she had to move around?
Possibly.
Wrong. There's no household mentioned. Lydia mentions the household, which we don't know if she was married either.
We don't know either one, and that is yet quite natural for us to be curious about. She was able to travel, and thus that indicates the possibility of never having married or a widow, likely.
Well, you would think a woman at that time would not travel by themselves.
No,
Without male counterparts.
especially in light of robbers and problems that existed out on the roadways, for sure. Let's discuss a little bit further about Cenchrea. We live in a world that's not friendly to Christ followers. We live in communities and areas. We may have some neighbors here and close by where you live that are good, faith-possessing people, righteous people. But by and large, that was not the case then, and it's not the case now. Any wisdom as to how she did it or how we should do it today? Let's elaborate on the obstacles as well as the how-to of what she did and thereby make an application of her life to ours. How did she do it? She just did it, didn't she? Wasn't any magic formula. It wasn't, okay, here's the 4-step plan and you do that, you'll be respected. No. Nothing like that. We're told in Titus, and I refer to this quite often, as you know, but it's a good single, almost one phrase that says that in order to follow Christ, we've got to deny ungodliness and worldly lust. That's the negative. And we've got to live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. The writer of that had experienced this present world pretty much, Paul. He had been abused physically, beaten, ran out of town. They wanted to kill him. But he still knew that you've got to purge out that which is bad and build upon that which is righteous. I offer for our consideration, that's what Phoebe did. That's what Lydia did. That's what so many other Christian men and Christian women did in the first century. They now had heard and believed in Jesus. They had obeyed the precious power of the gospel, of which Paul says in Romans 1:16 is the power to save. They knew that. They believed that. It was a powerful faith. It was not just look down at the bottom on 3 at the bottom of the back page. She wasn't just a spiritual snacker. She was a learner, a deeply convicted, passionate worker, sacrificial. It wasn't half-heartedly that she went about these things. Well, I'll give out of the overflow. I've got plenty, and this token. No. Everything that we hear about her was one that was so convicted that he was the Messiah, and to follow him meant salvation and eternal paradise. And she lived that every day. People around her likely heard her talking about Jesus. I don't know all of this by any information, concrete or scripture, but I know her and what Paul said about her to the point likely she talked to the others about the power of the gospel to save others. She was one that was not timid, maybe not out of her place in any way, but yet aggressive enough to want to discuss that with others. And others saw that. They saw that it was not pretense, that it was not just a one-day religion, but here's a woman that lives that, is treating others fairly in business, is honest, and is spiritual. Application, again, isn't it? Each of us. That's what we should do. Phoebe was a light in her community and wherever she traveled in Rome or wherever else it might have been. People recognize Saul here as someone that is a spiritual person, righteous in her living. But I'm not trying to beat it to death, but I keep coming back to saying that's precisely what we must do. When we go to the grocery store, Walmart, Dollar General, drugstore, wherever it may be, to act, to talk, to treat, be fair in everything we say and do. Now, truth be known, I believe y'all are already doing that. I hear of your works at different times from other people that I cross paths with, even down in this area. So it's not like I'm trying to say this in a negative way, saying you ought to do different. You're not doing it now, but you need it. No. I'm just saying that's what she did. That's why we need to follow her. And it's because, number 4, because of her deeds, she was to be, by the Roman Christians, treated with respect and love. The name Phoebe is interesting. It means bright and radiant, which certainly represented her life. I've been battling in just the last few minutes what I'm going to do. I'm going to stop the class at this point, and I'm going to ask Randy if he will to come close the service with the invitation. I've been having a little stomach bug, and I'm feeling a little sick and nauseous right now. Nothing big, and I don't think it's contagious. I think it's evidently part of my food that I've been fixing. And it'll do it every time, I guess. I didn't want to blame LaDon for it, but I am going to stop at that point. So I think, who has got the singing? Richard? Newell? Randy?
I'll go ahead and get something.
Me?
I'll do it.
Oh, you will? Okay. If y'all will take that and close the service.
Newell, the number is what? Okay. 430 will be our invitation. I was sitting there thinking as Brother Paul was talking about Phoebe, the fact of the matter is that we're in a position very much like she was, because she imitated Jesus Christ. He came to seek and serve. He didn't come to be served, but to serve. And if we follow his example, we'll be doing just the same kind of thing that Phoebe was doing. She was serving others, and Paul admonished others to serve her. We serve not just to get a name for ourselves, not at all, but we do it because we're trying to imitate the behavior, the actions of our Savior. And so we empty ourselves in serving others. That's one of our goals as Christians, to be faithful in following the example of Christ. He submitted to the will of the Father. Every Christian needs to submit to the will of the Father. And if we realize that we have not been doing that in a faithful manner, we need to ask for the prayers of our brothers and sisters that they will, by praying for us, that'll be a great encouragement. So tonight, if there are any in this audience who have a need to ask for the prayers of the church, we would encourage you to make it known and let your brothers and sisters. I hope we're praying for each other every day anyway. But if you have a need that you would like to express, we would invite you to do it as we stand and sing this invitation song.
God
Is calling the prodigal, come without delay. Hear, oh, hear him calling, calling now for thee.
Though you wander so far from his presence, come today. Hear his loving voice calling still. Calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal,
Weary prodigal, come.
calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come. Come,
There's bread in the house of thy Father, and to spare. Hear, oh, hear him calling, calling now for thee. Lo, the table is spread and the feast is waiting there. Hear his loving voice calling still. Calling now for thee. Oh, weary prodigal, come.